Okay, we will now call to order the Tuesday, March 10, 2020 regular meeting of council to order. Adoption of the agenda, please, as amended. Councillor Blanchette, Councillor Pearson, to include 11.1 resolution submission to the NCLGA 2020 annual general meeting. Any further additions? All in favor? It's carried. We have time for public comment under 3.1 as on items as considered by council on the approved agenda. And please, from the podium, and topics that are not normally dealt with by village staff as a matter of routine. They shall be addressed to myself and answers given likewise. Debates with or by individual members of council and staff are not allowed during this time. No commitments shall be made by council in replying to a question. Matters which may require action of council shall be tabled to a future meeting. Most importantly, bylaws and temporary use permits, etc., that have been considered at a public hearing but have not yet received final approval should not be raised during this time. Individuals must state their name and just their area of residence for identification purposes. They will be given 2 minutes, notified by this timer, beginning after welcome. Are there any public comments this evening?
Eugene Jamin from Valemount. Thank you. I have 3 concerns. One is concerning the time being allotted to our VCS for the food security. My concern is that we have 2 agencies that are wanting to tackle this issue, and by appearances, they're not talking to each other. And that to me is a concern. I know it's not the purview of the council, but I feel this does not serve us well. The second is the EV charging station. In the past, I've thought, well, I would never get an electric car. I'd never be able to get to the city. But it's coming to the point now that that's the direction we're heading in. And on that basis, I really feel we need to move forward in making more and more opportunities for people to be able to charge their vehicle. That it is possible for you to drive, let's say, to the coast and not worry about running out of power. I'm also concerned about the wood stove exchange. It looks like there's been no applications to change over. And I don't know if we need to rethink it or what it is, but it's kind of concerning that you're offering free money and nobody's taking it. And it may be that all those who have applied already have CSA approved stoves, but with that kind of return, to me, it kind of says, why don't we rethink this as to how do we move forward into better stoves for everyone? Those are my concerns, and thank you for hearing me.
To give an answer, I do believe there have been applications to the wood stove exchange program.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, because...
Yes.
Yes. Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further public comments this evening? Motion to receive public comments. Councillor Pearson, Councillor Blanchette. All in favor of receipt? It's carried. 4.1, adoption of the minutes of the February 25, 2020 regular meeting of council, please. Councillor Pearson, Councillor Blanchette. Any errors or omissions arising? All in favor? It's carried. 4.2, adoption of the minutes of the February 25th public hearing. Councillor Blanchette, Councillor MacLean. Any errors or omissions arising? All in favor? It's carried. 5.1, we have a delegation this evening from Urban Systems regarding asset management planning. Please welcome Mr. John Weninger of Urban Systems. Before we begin, delegations have a maximum of 15 minutes, to which, if council feels we wish to continue, we will take a vote on the matter and continue or not.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Torgerson, members of council. I'm really happy to be here tonight to present a summary of the findings and recommendations from a project recently completed involving improving asset management planning at the Village of Valemount. This presentation is based on a report that is in draft form. Based on any feedback we get tonight and feedback from staff, we'll be revising that, and you should be having that in the near future in a final form. That works. So this project had a number of outcomes that we wanted to achieve. Those were to really understand what level of funding is required to sustain the village's assets over the long term. We wanted to look at the impacts of growth on the village's infrastructure and how that might impact your assets. We wanted to assess risk of asset failure and how that might influence how you prioritize your infrastructure and your infrastructure planning. We also wanted a policy to guide investment decision-making and funding decisions. We wanted to look at how climate change, how vulnerable the assets might be to climate change and what you might expect from that. And then finally, as a bit of a value-added component, we developed a visualization tool that basically summarizes this information in a visual dashboard. So to accomplish that, we essentially had what I would say were 8 separate projects. Any one of these could have been a separate asset management project on its own, but we bundled them into 8 because there was gas tax funding available for the project. So we took advantage of that, or the staff took advantage of that. The components were the asset management investment plan, risk framework, the growth projections, infrastructure needs. These are all appendices in the report you'll be receiving, by the way. Climate change vulnerability, condition assessments, financial policy, funding review, capital plan, and the visualization tool. So each of those is an appendice that will be in the final report. But what I'm going to do tonight is just run through very high level some of the key outcomes of that. The first component was the asset management investment plan. And this is really a plan that looks over a very long term to understand what future investments might be needed in water, sewer, stormwater, and roads infrastructure. The output of that is the annual investment requirements, and that's based on the renewal costs and the remaining service lives of these assets. So really, this is an input to support your long-term financial planning decisions and just to provide you information on what risks might be ahead related to the aging of your infrastructure. In order to do that, we need to understand what you own, and then we have to determine the replacement value of those assets. So I've given you a quick summary here of what you got. It's quite a lot of assets. 24 kilometers of water mains in total, fire hydrants, valves, 32 kilometers of roads, 15 kilometers of gravity sewers, reservoirs, treatment, lift stations, manholes, the type of infrastructure that we'd encounter in any typical municipality. From that inventory, we used unit rates data from construction cost history in the region, and we determined what the replacement value of each of those infrastructure systems are. You see a pie chart here. The total value in 2020 dollars is about $54 million. Split fairly evenly, other than stormwater. There's not a whole lot of stormwater infrastructure in the village. The largest component is your wastewater system, then your roads and your water system, but fairly close in value. The next thing we look at in developing one of these plans is what the remaining life is in these assets. I'm sorry, I apologize for the small text here. I just wanted to give you kind of an idea of the types of things that we're looking at. We're looking at each category of assets. We're looking at what the expected life of those based on a rule of thumb, or a best practice estimates. I won't say rule of thumb. and how old those assets are when they were installed. And we had all that information, and from that we can determine, well, when are these assets likely to fail, or what's the remaining life in them? By knowing this, we're able to understand how much you would want to invest annually in each of these asset systems, such that we are confident over 10, 20, 50 years, you'll be able to replace the infrastructure that needs to be replaced when it fails. And I've given a breakdown here. The total is about $1.15 million annually. And if you think about it, it makes sense. You've got $55 million worth of assets. And if they were to last, 50 years on average, that's about 2% of the 55 million. So you'd expect something around $1 million. So this would be fairly typical for a community of this size. Now, I'd mentioned that the average annual life cycle investment, which we'll abbreviate AALCI from here on in because it's a lot to write out. I mentioned that it was based on standard best practice lifespans. For instance, a PVC pipe might last 80 years. A manhole might last 50 years, etc. And that's how we came up with these numbers. So roads and drainage, based on the lifespans that we used in the project, the best practice, it was about $400,000 a year. Water about $317,000, and sewer about $429,000 a year. Now, that may be conservative. Engineers, can be conservative sometimes on those lifespans. I understand that. So I've said, well, what if they actually last 50% longer than what the engineer's best practice would be? And that's what that second column is. That's the lower value. I like to use 50% because I think you could say, I think there's a fair argument. They'll probably last longer than the engineer's estimate, but it's unlikely they're going to last more than 50% longer. So that's that lower boundary in the right-hand column. So it's useful, now that we know what the funding targets are, let's have a look at what amount of funding is currently available for capital annually. So working with staff, I've broken this down for you. In the general fund, it's about $37,000. Water and sewer about $18,000 each. Now, if you compare that to what the asset management plan would say would need to be invested annually, you can see that there's a shortfall. And I've given the shortfall in a range, and that's based on whether you want to be conservative and use the best practice numbers, or you want it to go a little less conservative and use the assuming the assets last 50% longer than the engineer's standard estimate. So in the far right-hand column, I've provided a guideline of how revenues would need to be adjusted to get to those target values. Please, if you have a question during the presentation, let me know. I'll answer it, but I'm also pleased to answer questions at the end, of course. So that was the asset management investment plan, and later in the presentation I'll come back to kind of what that means in the summary. Another component was the risk assessment framework and analysis. Risk is a really important tool in prioritizing how you rehabilitate your infrastructure. Risk looks at not only the likelihood of something's going to fail, but what's the consequence of that failure? Because there may be assets that, well, it might be getting quite old, but we're okay if it fails, because it will be very easy for us to go out and fix. But there may be assets where if it did fail, it would have a very high consequence. So that's really important to know, because you never have enough money to replace everything. So you need a method to say, well, we don't have enough money, what should we be looking at? The risk framework set of criteria that we worked on with staff to categorize into 3 categories: low risk, medium risk, and high risk. And there's nothing scientific about them. They are somewhat subjective, but it does kind of break them into categories so you can see what's important and what's not important. And you can see here that the majority of your assets are in medium risk, which is good news. But there is a bit of wastewater gravity sewer, about 99 meters, that according to our analysis, it would be classified as a high-risk asset. Now, that doesn't mean that needs to be, you need to rush out and replace it, because this was a desktop study based on the information we had. What it would mean is you might want to just go have a look at those, understand why they might be high risk, and then evaluate whether you need to do something operationally or whether you might want to consider replacing it earlier than usual. We looked at the impacts of growth on a community. So to do that, we pulled together census data, information on previous development and on future development, and we put together 3 scenarios to consider: a low growth, medium growth, and high growth. You can see, I won't go through them all, but you can see the low growth scenario looked at about 50 units over the next 20 years, plus additional tourism-related commercial development. And the high growth was about 100 residential units over the next 20 years, plus some additional tourism-related commercial development. So using that, we were able to look at your core infrastructure and assess how would those growth scenarios, how might they impact your infrastructure, and is there anything that you need to be concerned about or be thinking about at this time? And mostly good news. The water treatment plant has a design capacity of about 57 liters a second. Working through the high growth scenario, and the details will be in the final report of how we did that. We estimated about 44 liters a second. So there looks like there's good capacity there for you. Similar with this sewer treatment plant, 1,500 cubic meters a day capacity, and we were estimating flows of around 1250 meters cubed per day in the high growth scenario after the 20 years. A couple areas that did require capacity upgrades are the Dogwood and 17th Avenue lift stations. Now, Dogwood, I believe you have a grant application in for now, and that's in planning. And I'm not sure, I know 17th Avenue is also on your radar. Both of these lift stations too, it's not just capacity related, they also have rehabilitation requirements. So it's kind of double aspects to that. And then looking at the transmission collection mains for water and sewer, from what we can see, they seem to be adequate for the high growth scenario. So overall, pretty good there, I think. Climate change. Well, this is certainly something that is on every community's mind, the world's mind, for sure. What we did was, there's a lot of information on this now available. We're able to really hone in on this in a fairly fine detail. So we actually had to use a climate model to predict what we might expect here in this region. What we found from that model is that we can likely expect average daytime high and nighttime low temperatures to increase for all seasons. We can expect that total precipitation will increase for all seasons except for the summer, in which decreases are expected in July and August. So perhaps some possibility of drought there.
I'll just stop you there, John.
Yeah.
Council, motion please to continue, or to extend the delegation time. Councillor Pearson, Councillor Blanchette, all in favor? Carried.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then finally, it's likely, and I think we're already experiencing this all over. We need to expect longer and more intense storms. What does that mean? Well, we looked at all of the infrastructure. I've given you a very high-level summary of kind of the main things that came out. For your roads, I think there's a potential for more winter freeze-thaw cycles, which could increase cracking and might lessen the expected lifespans of some of your roads. Your water system, hotter and drier summers could result in increased water demands, or I think it likely will. And it might have an impact on the output of your treatment plant and the capacity there, which wasn't included, I'll note, in our growth. When we looked at that, we didn't consider, or an estimate on what the impact might be for water consumption. But just to have it on the radar and be aware of that. And then with the wastewater system, the main thing that came to mind was the more frequent and intense storms. We can expect more power outages. As you know, your lift stations, sewage lift stations, are a very critical component of your infrastructure. Most of them have backup power. Some do not. I know you have operational ability to handle that, but I would just flag it as something to make sure has been thought through, and in the case of a long-term power outage, you're able to manage that. In terms of drainage, it's not really a major concern here in the village. The soils here are able to handle a lot of moisture. One thing that came up was that you might expect more debris accumulation, and maybe you might need more frequent maintenance of culvert stitches, catch basins, and dry walls. So just something to be aware of. Financial policy. This is almost a whole workshop on its own, because this is really something that needs the input of council and your endorsement and buy-in on. We did a draft of this with staff for your consideration. It'll be in the report. And it included areas such as property taxes and user fees, surplus funds, reserve funds, debt, grants, and asset renewal. So under each of those topic areas, there's a number of recommended policy statements, which would be consistent with other communities' policies, which I've worked in. So there's nothing, and it's probably likely very consistent with how you operate. It's more putting it, writing it down, documenting it, and just making sure it's transparent and everybody knows why things are done the way they're done. But I don't think you'll find anything in there that would be a surprise. Okay, probably the key part of the whole thing, I imagine you'd be most interested in, is what does this all mean to how we're funding infrastructure? So we tied it up in a final report that was a funding review and a capital plan. So we looked at two things here. We worked with staff to develop a 10-year capital plan, and that would help understand, well, what's coming up in the near future that you need to manage. And then combined with that, we also said, well, what's beyond 10 years, or what can we expect 20 years or beyond that we're going to need to deal with. And that's what was in the asset management plan. So by bringing these two together, we've got a view of what's coming up in the near future, and then what can we expect in the long term. And here's what we found. I've broken it down by fund. Now the first column there, the average annual life cycle investment, you will remember that from the asset management investment plan, the previous slides, and that's that same funding range for each asset category, depending on whether you assumed the assets last based on the engineering best practice estimate or whether they last 50% longer. The right-hand column is what's actually in your 10-year capital plan. You can see they're mostly lower, other than for sewer. I want to emphasize at this time that the average annual life cycle investment that you see for, sometimes I say general, it's really just roads and drainage. It doesn't include some of your facilities. It includes water and sewer facilities. Those are all within those funds. But you also have some other structures around and facilities. We don't generally include those in the study because often they won't be replaced in the current form. There's generally some functionality that will change, capacity will be increased. Those really require an independent study, so they're not included in these numbers. I just want to be clear, we're really just dealing with, in the general fund, roads and drainage access, which are probably the larger component.
Things like airports.
Yes, exactly. So, by combining this information, we can see if there is a gap. Is there a funding gap? And no surprise, you do have a shortfall. So you've seen these numbers before. First column is what's currently available for capital funding in terms based on the revenues that you're currently collecting for each of those asset categories, those asset systems. Compare that to what the average annual life cycle investment is. We come up with a shortfall, and then here would be, again, that percent adjustment to user fees and taxation. So what does that mean in day-to-day budgeting, year-to-year budgeting? What we did there was we took this information, the capital plan, the funding targets, your existing debt, your reserve levels, your development cost charge, your DCC reserves, and we developed a model over 20 years, 10 years. And the output of that was these recommendations, that for your general taxation, and this wouldn't include any other work you want to do on other facilities. This just includes the roads and drainage on the general taxation. It would be a 2% annual increase for the next 10 years dedicated to capital replacement, and that doesn't include a COLA of 3%. Similarly, water user fees would need to see a 4% annually, and sewer user fees 6% annually. And I'll note that those numbers get you to the lower average annual life cycle investment. They do not bring you up to the more conservative level. We had a quick look at development cost recovery and the tools that you have there. And we noted of the total capital projects, which was about 4.7 million over the 10 years, about 900,000 of it you could attribute to growth. There's currently 350 available in the DCC reserve, so there's a bit of a gap there. And looking at what you might anticipate in revenues based on the current DCC bylaw, it appears that you'll fall short in actually achieving full cost recovery from development. So we would recommend you might want to have a look at the DCC bylaw and see what might be done there. Also, that will work well for infill, smaller developments. If you have larger developments that come up, you should consider, we'd recommend looking at an other tool, possibly a latecomer agreement or a comprehensive development agreement with that specific developer, because the impacts that they'll have will be very specific to certain areas. Okay, just some general observations. I've gone through a lot of material here. I wanted to highlight, to me, what are the main takeaways, or what I take away from it, and I'd like you to take away from it. You, staff, council, you're stewards of $54 million of water, sewer, and stormwater and roads assets. Considerable amount. Much of this infrastructure was installed in the 1970s. And it is approaching, much of it will reach the end of its life in the coming decades. Now, I know you've been very successful in the past at securing grants, and that's been excellent, and I encourage you to continue pursuing those opportunities. I think we need to be conscious that the availability of grants in the future, particularly for the rehabilitation of linear water, sewer, and roads assets, is uncertain. a lot of projects you'll have that you'll need to do be very difficult to make them contingent on getting a grant, because they're not really optional. In order for your systems to operate, they'll need to be done, and you'll need to be prepared for that. As I showed in previous slides, your current revenues are currently not adequate to build the required reserves to address those upcoming investments. And that user fees and taxation should be adjusted to reflect those long-term needs. The visualization tool. I was hoping to give an actual demonstration of it, but since we are working from another laptop here, I didn't come prepared to do that. Perhaps we can do that at another time. I think it will be quite useful. It's a free tool that we're going to provide to the village. Anybody can use it. It's quite simple to use. It takes a lot of this information into a graphical form so that you can analyze any part of the city, understand the value of that city, understand the risk from that point of view. You understand what's coming up in the next 20 years based on the theoretical lifespans, and create reports from it. Yeah, maybe we'll get a chance to demonstrate that in the future, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention and show you a screenshot of that. And thank you for your time. I'm happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Motion to receive the delegation. Councillor Blanchette, Councillor Pearson. Questions of John and the presentation, our stewardship of $54 million and our shortfall and inadequacies in user fees and taxation. Councillor MacLean?
I had a question. I wondered if most municipalities are in this boat or if we're special.
Well, you are a special community. There's no doubt about that. It varies. I've worked in many communities. The funding levels that I presented here, the average annual life cycle investment, those are typical. They're what I'd expect for the amount of infrastructure that you have here. If you want my honest opinion, the amount that you have available for capital is very low on an annual basis. You've been very fortunate to get the grants that you have that have allowed you to carry forward. And I know you have some good reserves there, and hopefully you get the grant for the lift station. That aside, I would highly recommend that you look at increasing the revenues there so you can be more self-sustained going forward.
Thank you.
Any follow-ups, Councillor MacLean? Shall we go around the room?
Yeah.
I had nothing at this time.
Councillor Blanchette?
No, I'm scared, thank you.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I did have
Yeah, go
one.
ahead.
So just to clarify, we need to be putting away 1.15 million needed every year in our reserves for replacement. Is that,
That was the, through the mayor, that is the total for roads, drainage, water, sewer, based on the more conservative lifespans that would be consistent how accounting in the TCA would depreciate those assets.
Tangible
Capital assets, yes, sorry.
Thank you.
okay.
Any of your concerns alleviated? I'm smiling because I'm nervous. I have a few questions, but 15 minutes is up, so I'll ask council to give us another time allotted session. Councillor Blanchette, Councillor Pearson, all in favor? It's carried. The 54 million that we are stewardships of, does that also include the cost of installation, or is that just the asset itself?
That is the cost of installation, including engineering and contingency.
Okay, thank you. Tourism-related commercial development and growth, does Urban Systems consider each room a unit versus a residential unit? So you had tourism growth, hotel rooms. We are a resort municipality with probably a couple new commercial developments in planning. Do you consider each room in one of those accommodation sectors a unit?
Yes.
So in one development, we could have medium growth in the next year.
Oh, pardon me. We knew of the recent hotel that you have, 62 rooms, I
Yep.
believe. And I believe there's another 64 unit hotel
Yes.
there. So we don't count each hotel room as a unit. There's an engineering standard allowance for what you would have for a typical hotel room. So it doesn't have the same burden.
As a residential unit?
As a residential
Okay,
unit.
thank you. Yeah, fortunate to live on sand versus clay here.
Yes.
But clay does exist further towards the marsh and at depth. So installation of sewer at 8 feet, 9 feet, used to certainly run into a nice lush blue shale clay. Very nice. 21%, including COLA, is what we're in shortfall of for user fees and taxation. As presented in slide. There is no, on the financial amount, impact to taxation and user fees. So 2 plus 4 plus 6 plus 9 is 21. Scary, Councillor. You know, 174 to 268% inadequate. And we need to do some digging, I think. And our DCCs, we are quite aware, Mr. Robinson, that our DCC is in dire need of upgrading. Any further comments to Urban Systems? Thank you very much, sir. We really appreciate you taking the time to present this presentation. I look forward to seeing the revised draft report as you continue to work with staff, as do, I'm sure, all of council. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All in favor of receipt? It's carried. Item 6.1, Robson Valley Community Services Food Literacy Program. Thank you very much. Recommendation here that council considers waiving community hall rental fees for RVCS food literacy program. It will take place up to a maximum of 2 days, 10 hours per month for a 12-month period. What's council's wish?
Sorry if I might interject, we might just want to leave out the word considers, so it's a definite.
That
Sorry,
council waives.
Yes,
I don't think it goes against the intent of the resolution.
okay.
That council waives community hall rental.
Also move.
Councillor Pearson, Councillor MacLean, any discussion? Councillor Pearson?
Yeah, no, with the rewording of this and the little further definition of time periods and stuff with that, I'm satisfied with this one.
Thank you very much. Further discussion? All in favor? It's carried. Thanks, Michael. Item 7.1, appointments to the Valemount Community Forest Limited and Valemount Industrial Park Company Limited Board of Directors. Recommendation here from management of our limited partnership over there is that the appointment of the following individuals to the Board of Directors for both the Valemount Community Forest Co-Limited and the Valemount Industrial Park Co-Limited be approved by council. Councillor MacLean?
I may have to recuse myself. My husband is so named there.
You have a relationship with one of the applicants. Thank you very much. Still in quorum. So our limited partnership is looking to reinsert Ainsley Jackman, Gordon Carson, Peter Reimer, John McGuire, Vern Mickelson, Jerry Piper, and Ray McLash. Councillor Blanchette, Councillor Pearson. Discussion. Councillor Blanchette.
Just like to thank them all because they really know what they're doing and they do a great job. And they're doing it again and again. So thank you for that.
Awesome. Further discussion? All in favor? It's carried. Thanks, want to go? Double duties tonight. Is there anything out of the reading file that council wishes to bring out? Councillor Blanchette?
I think just to acknowledge Debbie Knelson's letter about the icy conditions and for people just to be careful and to also make sure that you're wearing grippers too. So that's an added plus.
Certainly helps. And staff are looking into some of the more descriptive portions of those of that letter. Very good. Anything else, council? We now have a presentation from our Director of Finance under 9.1 to give us a budget presentation prior to our consideration of this agenda item. Director McNee, how are you?
Okay, thank you. Just need a minute to set that up.
Thank you very much. You know, a good administrator would have had that done already.
Knew that was coming.
Thank you. So tonight, this presentation is to go over some of the projects and expenses that we're going to incorporate into the 5-year financial plan bylaw. This is just a draft, and it's just to get the bylaw started. The process is that I will bring all of these decisions back into the bylaw for first and second reading. After that, I will have a public presentation, and we will receive any public comments that will be brought back forward to council prior to the third reading. And any changes and amendments can be made at that time as well. Total, everything has to be done by May 15th to meet legislation deadlines. This is just a reminder of what council's strategic priorities were for this year going forward. Every expense or project lists one of these priorities to know that we're staying on track. Communications, fiscal responsibility, community health, and land use planning development. In 2019, we had a number of projects that were not completed. These expenses will come forward from the 2019 surplus. So I'm going to go through these rather quickly and just show you where we are with each project. The OCP bylaw upgrades is also included with the zoning bylaw upgrades. We have an RFP out right now for this, which closes on March 25th, I believe. So it is in process and coming. Subdivision bylaw upgrades. This one we are still searching for grants so that we don't hit our surplus for this. Website upgrades. I just received back comments from council, public, and staff. So we're currently working on an RFP for this as well. Hopefully it'll be out within the next week. Airport surveying. This was not completed last year, but in the new projects, you'll see that we have some land surveying, and it's for a couple other roads in town, and we'd like to include this with it, with the RFP, just to save costs. Municipal office. At the Community Services Building, we had a grant from Rick Hansen, and we did some upgrades to the washrooms to make them accessible. That has just been completed. We now have to finish the accessible doors, and again, we have another new project for an accessible door, so we'd like to combine those two at the RFP for cost savings. A salt shed at the Public Works. This is not their salt shed. It looks a little worse for wear than this, so they plan on doing that this year.
Is that the metal closet or the wooden building that's near?
It's the wooden building that is the salt shed.
Thank you.
Plow and sander, we have an RFP going out for this, as well as the backhoe, and I believe this is trackless boom. The new cemetery, we have set aside money in for the cemetery. However, I believe we're going to have another council meeting to discuss what we're exactly going to do with the new cemetery. I don't believe we have a resolution that states exactly where we want to have it and what we need to do with it. So depending where will definitely depend, it will increase or decrease costs regarding water, landscaping, surveying and such. Carris Drive street lighting. We went and looked for a couple of quotes for this, but because we don't know exactly where our road and everything is, we are going to include this in the surveying as well in a new project, and then we'll look for more quotes that are more suffice for that project. Daycare building, we're looking to do, I believe, the emergency door for the daycare, and Public Works has that on their radar for this year. Roads, we plan on doing some patching and seal coating of Main Street this year, so that RFP will also be going out soon. Opportunity grants, last year was the first time we included $20,000 into the budget, and this was so that we could use that amount if any grants that came up that we hadn't already thought of that we could take advantage of. Last year, council agreed to take $10,000 of that and put it to senior housing. I believe the expenses have happened already, but we just haven't transferred the funds, so that'll be coming out of that. Swift Creek Bridge, we just have some maintenance to do on that didn't get completed last year. Village entrance sign, sanding, staining. For 2020, these are the new projects that staff have come up with. Data insurance and offsite backup. Unfortunately, cyber attacks are a reality, and this is going to be an annual cost that's going to have to be added into the budget. Land surveying is what we were discussing earlier, which we hope to include Carris and the airport. Municipal building upgrades, we have a few that need some additional work done. The community services building, with all of the changeover with organizations in that building, we need to have it rekeyed. We've had some issues with master keys working where they shouldn't. The courthouse, we need to have the automated door replaced or repaired, which we'd like to incorporate with the community services building. Library municipal building, we're looking at some LED lighting and ducting replacements. At the airport, we're looking to have crack sealing and line painting done. I believe 3 or 4 years ago we had this done and we received the BC Air Access Grant, but because it's an ongoing maintenance, we now have to fund it ourselves. We do have funding from gas tax, which is eligible, so we'd like to take it from that. Equipment, zero-turn lawnmower for Public Works. Last year they had to put a significant amount of money into the one because I believe a motor blew on it. Public Works is worried that if it happens again, we won't have anything. Just a general replacement for the tractor. Playground equipment, there are the Canfor trees that are currently there, and we've had reports that they have cracked, so we're afraid that the children might get pinched in there, so we're looking at replacing those. John Osachik dugouts, I believe they are redoing the roofs of those dugouts, adding those onto that. Parks, there's a few rotten log or wood beams on the beer gardens that need to be replaced. The airport, a weather station, council has already approved this and we've applied for a grant for this. We're just waiting for approval. Public Works employee, this is one of the bigger cost items that staff is requesting. $55,000 for a new Public Works employee. And I've listed off a few reasons, well, more than a few reasons of our justification for this. To show, just to go back, where the funding is coming from is general taxation. We aren't increasing taxation, it's going to come out of what we're already receiving with the 4% increase. What happened was we have a grant that we receive yearly where some of our administration our staffing comes from. That has just, the requirements have changed so we can include more now. So we've taken that amount and put it towards the Public Works. We also went through and we skimmed expenses wherever we could on the budget to get this on here. Last year we had subdivision included, and those are extra revenues that we never had before, which can be used towards this as well. And we had a slight increase in the BC Hydro grant that we thought we could use towards this as well. just to give you an idea, we currently have 5 public works staff plus the superintendent. Some of the changes that have happened in the last 10 years without any change in our staffing is that we've taken on garbage collection. We've had additional subdivisions come on board that we have to maintain. The downtown revitalization now has additional time that needs to be done for it. The Bigfoot Trail, additional commercial developments, and the water treatment plant we didn't have 10 years ago. Additional government reporting keeps our superintendent in his office more. And I've used this picture before because we literally feel like this some days. It's all paperwork and reporting. As you can see from the 2019 outstanding projects, there were 24 general, and including the water and sewer, there are 24 outstanding projects, which means we just don't have the staff to get them done. I've highlighted some of the council strategic priorities just to show that for this employee, this is some of the points that they're hitting. All of the community health, of course, it's because it's our assets. So for water, our 2019 carry forward projects, French Drain, I just talked to the superintendent today and he believes it's going to go on Cedar and Second, if anybody had any questions for that. The retention pond maintenance, we need to hire a contractor to get the sludge from that. We need a security camera at the water treatment plant. And we had agreed to get some underground sprinkler systems at the Centennial Park. We recently had a proposal for the CBT Initiatives program for a washroom. And so we're hoping that if we can get that to happen, we'll piggyback on that with the RFP and with the water installation and power at that same time. The new projects, the water treatment plant is now just over 10 years old. So the anthracite and filter clarifier all needs new circulation. And of course, this comes at a significant cost. But this is something that's going to have to happen every 10 years, so that we have to start budgeting for that. A high level pump at the water intake, we need to have a contractor come and analyze it to ensure that it's keeping up to the requirements. Water tank maintenance, we have a new and old one that needs to be inspected. A security camera at the water intake. And water treatment plant UV lights have to start being replaced again. There is a comment about the bulk water sales that we had in 2019. We had approximately $30,000 in revenue. And so someone had thought that we could spend it on something. I'm suggesting that this goes back into asset maintenance and replacement to help us with that, with our shortfall. 2019 carry forward projects for the sewer. We had inspections, camera inspections done, which noted a few places that need to be fixed. So we're going to do some grouting of the sewer lines. Lift station pumps, we need to purchase new ones. Unfortunately, at every lift station, there seems to be different pumps. They're not all the same, so we can have a couple just sitting there for replacement. They have to be different kinds. So we want to make sure that we have an additional pump if any fail. So we're trying to accumulate enough to cover that. Dogwood lift station, we do have a grant that we've applied for. We were just turned down for the first intake. They're looking at the second intake. If we're denied again, staff will be coming to council to ask for that $2.8 million that we have from the Northern Capital Grant to use some of that for this. New projects for sewer plant line cleaning, and that's going to be helping with the grouting that we need to complete. Control panel, I believe this is for the office lift station. The components inside are just wearing and tearing, need to be replaced. Analyze some of our lift station pumps to ensure that they're adequate for what we're doing with them. Refurbish new lift station pumps so that we have enough in case of a failure. Sewer plant needs UV lights. Flow meter, this isn't a requirement right now, but the Public Works Superintendent has heard rumblings of it becoming a requirement, a provincial requirement. So we just want to make sure that we have the money set aside for when it does, if it happens this year. Sewer plant pond maintenance, of course, desludging again. So the revenues required for all of the new and old projects. For general, you can see under 2019 surplus, this is everything that we didn't finish last year. So those funds will have been put into the surplus when you see the financial statements next council meeting. 2018 2020 taxation, we're looking at using whatever we have with that 4% increase to use. We have some grants. For anything that we're doing to the community service building, the courthouse, we have rental revenues to help cover that. And then the new projects that we had talked about, the playground equipment, the beer garden wall, will be coming out of the asset repair maintenance amount. And I'll show you on a spreadsheet once I'm done how much we're putting in and how much we have to take out. For the sewer, we're just using the 2019 surplus for the old projects, and then the asset repair maintenance fund for the new. And that will be the same for the water, or sewer and water. As I mentioned, you'll be seeing the draft financials from KPMG at the next council meeting. I've underlined, I believe it's 2.6 million that it shows in surplus. It just shows it on the financial statements, but I believe council understands that 530, some of that is from the surplus from the 2019 projects that weren't finished. And we also have funds already set aside in that surplus. We have additional gas tax funding, carbon tax, some of the asset management. Once this is completed, we will review the reserve bylaw that was passed recently, and we'll ensure that we have funds in each of those funds, or money set aside in each fund, like snow removal, insurance. So that'll be coming to council again as a report. These are some of the items that will be in that reserve funding for the bylaw. Previously, council has approved a 4% tax increase, and we've always said that 2% is COLA, 2% is going towards future reserves. The reality is that COLA for municipalities is roughly 3%, not 2%. When you think about a COLA, household items, the clothing, schooling, it doesn't compare to what municipalities need, like paving, insurance. So I've broken it down, so if we ask for a 4% increase, we're actually asking for a 3% for COLA and only 1% for revenues or reserves. With that 1%, we are receiving just over $7,500 to go into the reserve. Approximately, when I looked at the BC assessment roll, which will change again in April, it's roughly $11.40 per 100,000 that we're asking people to help pay for. And I'm just going to pull up the spreadsheets. So in this general budget, I've really tried to show where revenues are going and what expenses they're covering. If I can just, I'm not sure if this is going to work. An example is for the parks. We have quite a few expenses for the George Hicks Parks and Civic Grounds, some of the wages that come from that. To show, we actually receive $9,000 from Regional District every year to help cover some of the costs for that. And this is not going to work for me. Same with the business bylaw, or business services. Sorry, building inspector services. We're covering wages, office materials, training, and memberships. We show that we have permits coming in, building permits to help offset that. This remaining amount, the $46,000, is what has to be covered by taxation. Everything else, we try and get as many revenues to cover that. Here it shows $40,000 is what we're going to be budgeting to put into asset management, to the maintenance and reserves. This year alone, we have to spend $40,000 just to keep up with that maintenance. So we have nothing going into reserves this year. I'm sorry, I cannot see that. I believe you guys had a copy of this. And I just wanted to point out that for the reserves maintenance for sewer and water, it's approximately $75,000. However, the amount that we're using just to maintain this year is approximately $56,000. So we're only putting about $20,000 into the reserves, which shows from the asset management report that we are falling behind. My apologies, I can't make that bigger for you guys. And that was it for the presentation, if you have any questions.
Well, let's get number 1 on the table so that we may continue the discussion of, with the Director of Finance. That the proposed additional project purchases presented in the 2020 budget consideration presentation be approved. Councillor Blanchette, Councillor Pearson, any questions of the Director of Finance?
As mentioned, this is just the draft. It will be coming forward in a 5-year financial bylaw, which changes can be made at that time, with public comment coming forward.
Absolutely. So you're asking for a 1% increase. John wants a 174% increase.
I wasn't gonna hit you with John's numbers right now.
Well, in actual fact, a nice padded 21% annually, that John's looking for. Council, any discussion around the budget as presented? See, there's no questions to the Director of Finance, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tough presentation after the asset management one.
Yeah, absolutely it is. Seeing that there's no discussion, all in favor that the proposed additional project purchases as presented be approved? It's carried. And a second recommendation from Director of Finance that a 4% tax increase for the 2020 taxation be approved. Councillor Blanchette, Councillor Pearson, any questions around the 3+1?
Not at this time.
No, at this time. All in favor? It's carried. 9.2, accounts payable, that the report be received. Councillor Pearson, Councillor MacLean, questions on the AP report? All in favor? It's carried. 9.3, building inspection report for February 2020, that the report be received. Councillor Blanchette, Councillor Pearson, any discussion? All in favor? It's carried. 9.4, Community Energy Association Level 2 Electric Vehicle Charging Station, recommendation that the Village of Valemount apply for the installation of a Level 2 EV charging station in partnership with the Regional District Phase Fort George at the Canoe Valley Rec Center. Councillor MacLean, Councillor Pearson. So we'll deal with that one first. Any discussion of partnering with the Regional District? All in favor? It's carried. Number 2, that the village dedicate up to $5,000 in the 2020 budget to contribute towards the Charge North EV Network project grant opportunity if the application is successful. Councillor Pearson, Councillor Blanchette, any discussion? Councillor Blanchette?
So we're going to be up to $5,000 as our share. Who's paying for the electricity? Like, is that coming separate? Is that the person paying for that? How is that working? Because the one at the park, we don't, nobody pays for, right? Except for the driver.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but how's this one getting paid for?
I guess for now, it'll be on the general hydro bill that the regional district takes care of. And then over time, if the EV2 charging station has a payment option, I imagine it'll be coming from the driver itself.
Okay.
I had a couple assumptions there, but I'm
Yeah.
guessing it's coming out of the meter, out of the rec center. Any further?
That's my understanding as well.
And mind you, this is coming, hopefully, Director of Finance can correct me, but this we can avoid bringing this out of general and taking it out of the climate action revenue incentive plan?
Correct.
Very good. So we've already paid for fuel, and so that generally won't be coming out of a general fund rather than that fund. Further discussion on the recommendation? All in favor? It carries. Councillor Pearson,
I'll recuse myself on 9.5
thank you. For the purpose?
as I'm an officer, executive officer of the Legion.
Thank you very much. Get comfortable. There is a recommendation here, council, so perhaps if we get it on the floor, and then I will read it verbally, and then ask for any of your amendments that are highlighted in yellow on your iPads and/or gray on paper form. Councillor Blanchette? Is there a seconder?
Yes.
Councillor MacLean? Be it resolved. Number one, that the Village of Valemount Council has considered the following. A, the location of the establishment. B, the person capacity and hours of liquor service. Number two, the Village of Valemount Council's comments on the prescribed criteria are as follows. A, impact of noise on the community. And it is the comments leading to noise is not expected to be an issue because of the closing hours, the location, and because the current operations have had negligible impact of noise on the community to date. Should noise become an issue, the Village of Valemount will be able to address this using its noise control bylaw. Are there any amendments to number two? And in B, general impact on the community if the application is approved. If the application is approved, the impact on the community is expected to be positive and continue to support a growth in Legion membership and visitation by non-members. Are there any amendments there? Number three, written views of residents were solicited through public notices posted on www.valemount.ca, the Village of Valemount Facebook page, at the village office, and at 970 Main Street, 20 days, at least 20 days, prior to council's recommendation. They were mailed to all properties within 100 meters of the subject property. They were advertised in the newspaper, Rocky Mountain Goat, on February 20th, 2020, 5 days prior to council's, at least 5 days prior to council's consideration for approval, and no comments were received. Number four, the Village of Valemount Council recommends the approval of the license change for the following reasons. Council has considered the impact on the community and feels that this change from a liquor primary club license to a liquor primary license would have an overall positive impact on residents, local businesses, and tourists alike. Are there any amendments to number four? Any discussion on the liquor license amendment as moved? All in favor? It carries. Sorry, Pete. Council passed that.
Thank you. Must be right fast.
Number 10.1, Village of Valemount Anti-Idling Bylaw Number 618, 2020 be adopted as presented. Councillor Blanchette, Councillor MacLean, any discussion on final adoption?
Thank you to staff and the committee.
Great task force there. We will now crunch down that this has been adopted. Well, we'll see. Any further discussion? All in favor? We are now crunching down on anti-idling. New business 11.1. My apologies to council. This is mine. I'm looking for support from this council for the 2020 annual general meeting resolution submission to the NCLGA. That the following resolution be submitted to the North Central Local Government Association for the 2020 AGM. Councillor Blanchette. Councillor Pearson. Geothermal exploratory drilling regulations, whereas in alignment with Section 2 of British Columbia's Clean Energy Act, geothermal energy is capable of providing British Columbian municipalities, Indigenous peoples, residents, and businesses with emissions-free, renewable baseload heat and electricity for the health and social economic benefit of the province. And whereas shallow exploratory drilling to determine temperature, stratigraphic, and hydrologic information, a fundamental tool in the exploration for geothermal resources, is now regulated by the Oil and Gas Commission under the Oil and Gas Activities Act as per the 2017 amendment of the Geothermal Resources Act, which unnecessarily increases shallow exploratory drilling costs by as much as 10 times as compared to the previous versions of the Geothermal Resources Act. Therefore, be it resolved that the NCLGA and the UBCM urge the provincial government and its relative ministry, the Ministry of Energy, Mines, Petroleum Resources, to amend the Geothermal Resources Act and/or direct the Oil and Gas Commission to allow for the cost-effective use of shallow exploratory drilling for geothermal energy development in British Columbia. Any discussion on the motion and/or the resolution? All in favor of sending this to NCLGA? Thank you very much. The deadline is Friday. Council reports, 12.1. Councillor MacLean, what'd you get up to?
Well, I had a telecon with the Columbia River Treaty Local Government Committee in late February, and a lot of catch-up reading and discussions this week regarding the Local Government Committee's recent planning sessions in Cranbrook in early March. These discussions are looking to determine the committee's priorities, actions, and strategies for the upcoming year. The next round of treaty negotiations will take place on March 11th and 12th in Washington, D.C. On Sunday, March 8th, I attended the public presentations for the Columbia Basin Trust Community Initiatives Program. Great attendance and lots of ideas put forward for consideration, thanks to staff and volunteers who worked to make this event happen. This event truly allows all residents to have their say in where the money will be best spent to improve our community. I also attended a meeting of the Valemount Entertainment Society on March 9th, but nothing to report out. And along with the rest of council, I attended an information session regarding the procedural bylaw yesterday.
Well, thanks very much.
Okay.
Exciting stuff with the LGC.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
Awesome.
Yes.
And negotiations in Washington tomorrow and Thursday.
Yeah.
Wow, okay, so they are moving on this. Councillor Pearson?
All I have to report was yesterday's lunch hour learning session on the procedural bylaw. That's all I have this week.
Thank you. Councillor Blanchette?
The CBT CIP public hearing, standing room only, very impressive, very good. Lots of really good applications. I'd like to thank CBT for this program. It helps a lot in our community, and we're all quite grateful for it. And I wish everybody, all the applicants, good luck, because we're oversubscribed and they're all really great. So, you know, good luck. That's it.
That's it?
That's
Yeah,
it.
being oversubscribed and some good presentations, I do not envy the adjudication committee.
I've been in there before and it's horrible. It's hard.
I do look forward to the recommendations.
Yeah.
Wednesday the 4th, invited to Valemount Elementary School to as a judge for their science fair. Very, very cool projects coming out of that. It's been, they haven't had a science fair in quite some time, and the coordinator there, Ms. Sheri, is looking to send 5 or 6 to the regional. So again, there was things like coding and like computer coding at such a young age, bacterial growth, food preservation, list goes on. Lego demolition and reconstruction, and it was very cool. On the 8th, joined colleagues for the CIP open house and the public forum. Yeah, just great presentations there. Yesterday, three things. Met with Linda LaFleur from the Trust. She's our Community North Relationship Advisor. As well, long overdue telephone meeting with Miles Bruns. And again, the learning session over lunch for the new procedural bylaw. So thanks for staff to taking time to really dive down into that small 26-page bylaw. Well, that's me for the last couple of weeks. On the road next week. Motion to receive. Councillor MacLean, Councillor Blanchette. Any further discussion in and around council reports? All in favor? Carries. 14.1, notice of proceeding camera for the consideration of one item, 91C of the Community Charter to discuss matters related to C, labor relations or other employee relations. Councillor Pearson, Councillor Blanchette, all in favor? It's carried. And we now close the open meeting.